Well, welcome everybody to WordCast number 72. I got the number right that time. I'm very proud of myself. And it's been a while, but we're back to talk to you guys and doing it remotely because the responsible thing is to still stay home right now. So that's what we're doing. But in reality, he's actually right behind me, and I'm coughing on him.
Clearly, you're coughing right now. Everyone can tell by the footage.
No, I just mute my mic when I'm coughing.
Yeah, but they can still see you coughing.
No, I also mute my video.
What are you on and where can I get it?
I am on a controversy about B450 chipsets that ends up not really being a controversy, but we'll get to that part after.
Well, it was a controversy. The controversy has been resolved.
Right, exactly. So it's not a controversy anymore.
And also, you should have said you were on a podcast.
Oh, you know what? I am on a podcast, but I don't know. Is that like one word? A podcast?
Okay, then.
Okay. So
what
anyway,
a great intro.
We're here to bring the tech news to you guys. That's what we're really good at. You know, we do it extremely consistently. We haven't ever missed a week, so it's pretty great. We're proud of ourselves for that. So anyway, the AMD B450 chipset. Some of you may have already heard about this, but there was a lot of controversy going around because AMD was saying that they were not going to support Zen 3 architecture Ryzen 4000 desktop on the B450 chipset.
And X470.
And the X470 chipset. Yeah, that's right. It was both of them. And that was really concerning to a lot of people because AMD had led an impression of the AM4 socket being used for a long period of time, which is still true, but they were not very clear about how they might change the chipset and keep the socket.
Yeah, so for some background, so when they first launched Ryzen and they first launched the AM4 socket, they said that the socket would be supported through 2020. Now, to most people, that sounded like that they were going to essentially allow you to buy any AM4 motherboard and use that board for the new CPUs through 2020. That's what most people thought it meant. That was what a lot of the hype was around it. AMD knew that was the expectation. It's not like this was just in people's mind. This was part of the core discussion about it. I specifically remember you being so excited about that and saying, like, this is how AMD is doing things so much better than Intel. And I agreed. That's an amazing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an important feature.
It was a great move that everyone was excited about. And then it was, 2018 that they had made the comment on Reddit? I think it was 2018.
Yeah, it was 2018.
Where they had talked about BIOS issues with Intel products on Reddit and said that, if they were to essentially artificially lock off CPU upgrade paths for motherboards just to make the upgrade process neater, that would be like hostile to consumers. And abusive to consumers. That was the hostile and abusive was what they said. And so that was very,
the term, yeah,
that was very concerning to people to now hear the announcement that Ryzen 4000 wouldn't work on AM4 motherboards, despite the fact that tech-wise, like, sure, there are other issues and we'll get into those as far as BIOS and as far as other motherboard aspects, but like ultimately they could make it work. It might not work as well. It might have issues, but they could make it work. And they said that it should, they shouldn't be cutting that off to make the upgrade process neater. So yes, there are other issues, but per AMD's own words, they should do it anyway.
I will say, if we're all being honest, Intel does change the platform more often than necessary just for the point of profit, not even just for the point of making the upgrade process simpler. Like if we look at a lot of boards, it is literally just because of money.
Now that being said, if you look at it, if they change the socket, even if they just artificially lock it out, but they say they changed it, at least in that case, compared to what would have happened if AMD didn't change things, and still is kind of happening, we'll talk about it more, but you run into the issue of, like, with Intel's path, people know what motherboard to buy based on what CPU they're buying. You just look for the compatible, like, that's it. You just look for the compatible socket, and it'll at least work.
In fact, I think they've added dummy pins before just to make it so that lines up so that consumers don't make that mistake.
And so that would have been a big issue with what AMD was doing, where if somebody knows some about building computers, let's say they built one 10 years ago and they haven't really paid attention, they don't dive into it, they just hear that Ryzen 4000 is amazing. And then they
Yeah.
go, oh, I'm going to buy this board or this CPU and it uses the AM4 socket, and I want to buy a cheap AM4 board. Oh, there's this B450 one on sale. I'm not planning on overclocking. Who cares? And it didn't
Right.
work. That could be a big problem.
Yeah, no, it would confuse consumers, and let's be honest, in the PC space, people are already confused enough.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's
so
especially made worse by the fact that, and I've talked with you about this, how like I would have had a bit less of a problem with it if B550 didn't get delayed. But
yeah,
you're
yeah, if
running
it had
into
been
the issue
released,
of, for the last year, the current gen cheap chipset was B450. And if you
yeah,
bought the current cheap chipset and you bought, let's say, the Ryzen 3 CPU, and your plan was, when I have more money after the initial build of my computer, I'll upgrade to the next gen CPU to get a bigger gain.
hmm
Well, now you're kind of effed if they didn't make this change, which they are now doing, of supporting Zen 3 on the 400 series boards, sort
yeah.
of.
So to be clear, the biggest issue that AMD talked about that does have some validity behind it is BIOS sizes, and uh, when you add more CPUs to a support, or well, I can't even talk. When you support more CPUs on the same chipset and the same BIOS, that BIOS chip has to house the microcode for more CPUs, and so you're going to be using up more space on it. And those BIOS chips are only anywhere from 16 to 32 megabytes, which is not a lot of space, and especially considering how many fun graphics and crap that these BIOS companies add to it, or these motherboard companies add to it, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But
Yeah. And
um,
then in addition to that, something I didn't even know until recently, but most of the Ryzen stack can't support 32 megabyte BIOS file sizes. Like,
yeah,
they can only
uh huh,
read 16 megabytes. And so if they were to drop a BIOS update that, required the board manufacturers to make it 32 megabytes, they actually couldn't run the CPU on that BIOS.
yeah, yeah. So that and a lot of this just stems from the fact that 16 megabyte BIOS chips are incredibly widely available. You probably have them in your TV. Basically, any single person watching this has been in contact with a 16 megabyte BIOS chip. You can get them anywhere. They're everywhere,
Mhm.
and that makes them really cheap. As we know, when you have a large quantity of something, it makes it cheaper to manufacture, and so you you have these 32 megabyte ones that don't sound like they should be that much more, but they are significantly more expensive. And then the other part that consumers tend to miss is what's a, say dollar, even though it's actually seems to be more than that. But say it's $1 more for those BIOS chips. But it's like, okay, yeah, but you move 300 million motherboards a year, or maybe not that much, 30 million. That's $30 million. Like, that's
Mhm.
not an insignificant amount of money. And even for these larger companies. And so there's this thing where these companies don't like to put the 32 megabyte on there if they can avoid it, when they're trying to cut costs to give you a board as cheap as possible. And so there was some validity here with the fact that it makes more sense to use 60 megabyte BIOS chips for a lot of board manufacturers. But one
Yeah,
of the
the
things,
the tech side makes perfect sense. The issue is
yeah,
just with how AMD set up expectations.
their marketing is what I feel like is my issue here. Is AMD's marketing is like notoriously inconsistent, and that's something that's bothered me. Is they'll
Mhm.
promise things and it doesn't happen, and it's not that AMD doesn't. I don't like to say try to do the right thing. Their end goal is profit, of course, their company, but they tend to be more on the consumer first, open source first kind of front. And when their marketing team promises something like that, you assume that's true, and when it's not, it's really frustrating. And that happens all too often with them. And I'm not here to say that Intel doesn't have the same problem. I do feel like Nvidia maybe is a little better on that front, where they don't promise something will be necessarily better than it is. They just overhype things like DLSS 1.0, which was not great, but they also didn't show screenshots that made it look like it was way better than what the actual end results were.
Yeah, I
Um,
think in that case, NVIDIA knew where the tech could get, and they were
yeah,
just
yeah.
essentially like so excited about that they talked about that when they should have made it clear from the beginning that it wouldn't be there anytime soon.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
they should have explained how long AI and machine learning processing takes. I mean,
yeah.
you train these neural nets, it takes a lot of time.
Mhm. And then The other
So
thing with this that I was gonna add,
yeah.
when it comes to kind of how AMD set everything up, they the issue is both with how they set it up to consumers, but also how they set it up to board partners. Because like ultimately, MSI and their advertising was their fault. So for people that don't
Oh
know,
yeah.
MSI advertised their 400 series Max boards as being able to support all future AM4 products.
Which was just like
Clearly,
a
they
mistake
were
on their
under
part.
the expectation that AMD planned on supporting those and that they expected to run into a BIOS size issue and they
Yeah.
expected to have to cut off boards or cut off processors at some point, like what is now happening with how they are doing this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it sounds like they, at least from maybe AMD, just never said anything to them directly at all, and maybe they were just going off of the consumer marketing, which would be even worse on MSI's part. And I also find that very unlikely. But no matter
Yeah.
what, how that was communicated to them, MSI was under the expectation that if they were willing to put in the work, like with what's now going to happen, and even with what happened with Zen 2 on X370, because from my understanding,
Uh-huh.
that was up to the motherboard makers, right?
Yeah, it was up to the motherboard makers, but basically all of them did it, I believe.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't
but
tried it, but
MSI was under the expectation then that it would also be up to them, and so they committed to doing the work essentially, and then they were then told by AMD when this became public, no.
yeah, yeah, and that
And
that that's where
so,
one of the root issues. And I mean, I will say it still falls on MSI
oh, I
ultimately
agree
because
completely. It
you don't make
if you're gonna
promises that you rely on somebody else for.
and if you're going to make that promise, you have a contractual agreement
Yeah, yeah, exactly, because
because
they could
that's a big
potentially face
promise to make.
lawsuits and stuff for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad. Um, but AMD just needed to do a better job of communication, and I guess that even stands into the marketing ploy or market not marketing ploy, marketing side of things. Is like I just feel like their communication is the issue. Like they don't always communicate to creators correctly. They don't always communicate to the community, and they don't always communicate to apparently their partners very well. And it's that kind of stuff where they need to be a little more straightforward, and maybe they need to hire more PR reps
Mhm.
as well as like business relation reps or something like that. Which certainly they have the money to do that kind of stuff now. And because that's something AMD has actually had trouble with, I feel like for a long time, even back to the FX series and stuff, is they just weren't always the best at communicating things.
Yeah.
And that needs to be worked on. Obviously, the performance side of things and stuff is more important and was more important, and
Mhm.
Dr. Lisa Su has helped with that. But I think now there needs to be a communication focus because Intel and Nvidia have both been pretty good about communication, at least on the private sector side of things, and to most of the creators. There have been some big issues, but and they haven't always been the best at consumer stuff because they've kind of practiced a little bit of like predatory stuff.
Mhm.
But in terms of business stuff, there hasn't been as much of a breakdown that confuses partners and stuff like that. That's always been mostly straightforward.
Yeah.
But
So real quick, I think we should just go through the bullet points about how this is going to work from AMD's Reddit post real quick. So I'll just read through
sure,
this,
yeah,
just so people understand exactly, because it's not just as simple as if you have X400 or X470 or B450, it's going to work.
right. There's quite a bit to it. Yeah,
What they said was, so there's 7 bullet points. Point 1, we will develop and enable our motherboard partners with the code to support Zen 3 based processors in select beta BIOSes for B450 and X470 motherboards. And
yeah,
then 2, these optional BIOS updates will disable support for many existing Ryzen desktop processor models to make the necessary ROM space available. My guess with this, while they're not clarifying, all Zen 1 chips are out, and it'll be um, Zen 2 and Zen 3, so Ryzen 3000 and 4000 only,
yeah,
would
yeah.
be my guess. And no APUs at all, because APUs take up more code.
Yeah, and
Um,
APUs take up a ton, so they just got to drop that support there.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Um, the select beta BIOSes will enable a one-way upgrade path for AMD Ryzen processors with Zen 3 coming later this year. Flashing back to an older BIOS version will not be supported. This is especially
Yeah.
going to affect the resale market. And if you've
Yes.
watched Gamer Nexus's video, that could be a really big deal for the Asian market, where that's much more common than in the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I can even just see that being a problem in general. Is like we're gonna see longer term complaints about this for sure.
yeah,
Like that's just gonna happen.
but in certain parts of Asia, reselling motherboards is a much bigger deal than it is here. And that's why I
Yeah.
wanted to mention that, is it can really affect the market there, whereas here it will be it'll it'll fuck some people over, but it's going to really be a big deal in Asia. And
Over
that's one of
there.
the things
Yeah.
that they had to weigh was, do we risk pissing off enthusiasts in the US or pissing off the aftermarket customers in Asia? There was no,
Yeah.
with the expectations they set up, there was no way to make both happy.
No, no, right. And that's
Um,
really what the stem of this comes from, is it's still the expectation that's a
yeah,
problem. And, because now we're going to face potentially longer term complaints and issues, and people are going to be bothered by it.
yeah,
And AMD is literally unlike what we have seen from Intel. Is the community is pissed about something, so they're fixing it.
yeah.
And like Intel, how many years did it take Intel to finally start to solder the IHS again? It took them
Mhm.
forever, and we begged and begged and begged for it, and they finally started
Yeah.
doing it again. AMD flipped this over in the matter of about a week.
Yeah. I think that them making this so clear with how it's going to work and not being able to go back from the beginning
Yeah.
does help with the resale aspect, because now you then have to take that into account when you're doing the upgrade on your board. Like, am I going to resell it? If so, then maybe I shouldn't, because that's going to affect the value of the board.
Yes.
But at
Yes.
least you know that in advance. And so I think that that's still fine. Especially if we talk about the Asian market, where reselling is bigger. Like, if you're looking at doing this and you know it's going to affect your resale value, then maybe you just don't upgrade your CPU as soon.
Yeah. Yeah. No. That I mean
Um,
that's true.
and then to reduce the potential for confusion, our intent is to offer BIOS downloads only to verified customers of 400 series motherboards who have purchased a new desktop processor with Zen 3 inside. This will help ensure that customers have a bootable processor on hand after the BIOS flash, minimizing the risk a user could get caught in a no boot situation. I
Yeah.
wonder
Yeah.
exactly how that's going to work, because they can't hardware verify it, because you can't boot the system yet until you can put the processor in. So I
Well,
wonder if they're just going to slip a code um in the box. That seems like the best way to
um,
do it.
yeah, they might go that direction. I'm sure the BIOSes are going to end up publicly available in places where you can download them from, who knows, Guru 3D or something.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be some of that happening, but I
Yeah, but
think
I'm just saying, like, how their official process is going to
it's going to
work.
be
I'm
a
just
code. I bet
wondering
it's going to be a
because
code.
yeah.
That's the intelligent way to do it. And like they're actually this is what I like, is it took them a matter of a week or two to turn around a situation that the enthusiast community was really mad about, and then dump money into helping avoid confusion about it.
Mhm.
And obviously, this being as big of a deal as it was, a lot of people are aware of it anyway. Enough people where if somebody is trying to do a build, somebody they are referencing the build to probably has warned them about it. But
Mhm.
they're still putting more effort into making sure that we don't have confusion on the general consumer side, and that right there is actually kind of impressive. If I'm being honest,
Yeah.
I didn't expect them to go that far. I did actually personally expect, and I would have said this last week if we had gotten to the podcast then, I expected them to turn this around and make it so that it was something that was viable. But putting extra effort into it is not something I would have expected.
Yeah, the way I saw it, especially before this announcement, like, I was the way I was thinking about it was, there's no way that they don't cave to the amount of pressure, because while AMD is growing, and at this point AMD hardware wise is like, they have the advantage.
Yeah,
Ultimately, general consumers don't really necessarily know that, don't really necessarily even sometimes care to look it up before they build their computer. How many people are still using Intel for brand new gaming rigs when it doesn't make sense?
yeah, yeah,
And enthusiasts still really drive the rest of the market, and they're not at the position where they have that mainstream association with being the top tier. And so
yeah,
if they, especially right now, especially approaching Ryzen 4000, which might be the thing that finally, because, like, a lot of people know now that Ryzen 3000 is essentially better for pretty much every use case.
yeah. It's
If what we're
basically across the
seeing
board. It's
for
better.
if what we're seeing for Ryzen 4000's rumors are true, then it's going to destroy Intel, and this will probably be the
Yes.
thing that transitions them to being that, okay, everyone just knows to go with AMD. Um, but if you
Yeah, like
piss
they're
off
at
all
that
the
point just a
enthusiasts
premium brand.
at that transition, that's the worst possible time to piss them off, because they'll
Yeah.
all give a big fuck you.
Yeah.
And so there was no way, especially right now, they didn't cave, I felt.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I was in the same boat. I felt like it was going to happen at some point, and
yeah,
I thought it would take a little longer than this, if I'm being honest. But
yeah.
um,
And then, so they also go on to say timing and availability of the BIOS updates will vary and may not immediately coincide with availability of the first Zen 3 based processors. This makes sense.
that's
If I
fine.
remember
Yeah.
correctly, some X370 boards didn't get the updates to support Ryzen 3000 right away.
No. Yeah. It
It
took
took
some of them
time.
quite a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
And then they also make clear that this is the final pathway they can enable for 400 series boards to add new CPU support. CPU releases beyond Zen 3 will require a newer motherboard. Um,
Hey, that's fine
per
because that's next year.
yeah, personally, what I hope that they do is change the socket. I don't care if they make it AM4 plus and put in fake pins. I honestly don't.
Yeah.
I think that they committed to supporting the socket through 2020. I think it'd
Yeah.
be a really weird thing for the final year for them to have dropped support. But I also think it'd just be weird for the to keep AM4 going and just have this constant rotation of like, okay, which AM4 CPUs work with this board?
No, I agree, and
Make it,
that's actually what they did with AM3 and AM3 Plus. Is
yeah,
it wasn't even dummy pins. It was the same pin out. They just put a plus in there, so it's really obvious.
yeah. And like honestly, if they rebranded AM or X570 to
Yeah.
AM4 plus, like that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, just something to really identify it.
Yeah. I just don't think they'll do that because of the fact that, like, my guess is whenever they do a socket change, they're gonna want some a specific amount of years in mind for upgradability, especially after this.
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
something that they can. I don't think they'll commit to, but something that in their head they're expecting. I
Yeah,
don't think they'll give
yeah.
any sort of 3-4 year out commitment after this whole
No, no, I doubt it. Yeah,
fiasco.
yeah, it's gonna be
Um,
just
and then
unforeseen issues sometimes.
yeah. Last thing they say is they'll continue to recommend customers choose a 500 series board, which the way that they said that, since this is talking about Zen 3, like obviously they'll continue to say that for now.
Yeah.
But like, are they gonna drop 600 series AM4 boards, or are they going if they're gonna move sockets next year, then I don't think it makes sense to drop a 600 series. Personally, like what features are you really going to add that are going to make that much of a difference? And if you're one
Well,
year out, then selling, having motherboard manufacturers invest in a new chipset and selling brand new boards at a new, higher price or equal price, but like unable to take advantage of price drops, only to drop the socket next year,
I
unless they can make the
I
socket like if
partially agree, but I also think that it depends on what Zen 3 Ryzen 4000 desktop is really going to entail in terms of
yeah.
power requirements and other stuff like that. There might be a reason why they like why it makes sense to launch the newer stuff.
Yeah,
But
I'm just
we'll
saying, like,
see.
if there is, I'm wondering what that is, because like if there's not a really important reason, then I feel like it almost just makes more sense to just let the 500 series ride out the um, end of the socket.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do either or.
Mhm.
I I don't think we're gonna see a 600 series. That would be my prediction, but I also could see why they might do it. So I
Yeah,
don't know. It's hard to say for sure, um, but on some more AMD news, that's maybe a little bit more positive for some people. Some new chips came out. So this right here is why we were kind of saying they should have just gone ahead and launched the 500 series at least alongside these chips. But AMD announced the Ryzen 3 3100 and the Ryzen 3 3300X. I don't really know if the X was necessary on that AMD because we don't have other ones there. But anyway, so their
no, it's extreme, dude.
budget, yes, yes, their budget quad core ones, quad core chips, and they're actually looking pretty amazing. And in fact, all the reviews have been very positive around them. So the Ryzen 3 3100 is $100 for 4 cores and 8 threads. Has a 3.6 gigahertz base clock and 3.9 boost. I'm not sure if there's been a lot of testing regarding precision boost overdrive and stuff like that. I can't remember if it's included on these. I'd have to double check. But anyway, the 3100 is two core CCXs and a single CCD. What that means is there is actually going to be some core-to-core latency because their two cores are these separate modules, so there's a fabric that they have to cross there. Whereas the Ryzen 3 3300X is actually a single 4-core CCX in a single CCD, and so that's going to give it a little bit better performance anyway, and it's only $120. It's also a 4-core 8-thread, but it has a 3.8 gigahertz boost and a 4.3 or 3.8 base 4.3 gigahertz boost. And I don't know, $20. I almost feel like, why would you buy the 3100?
Yeah.
Like, because you get that added latency, along with the lower clocks, just makes the 3100 a less sensible item. And when you look at the benchmarks, it is semi-significant for $20. I feel like, if you're spending this little amount of money on a PC, if it is for gaming or production work, you probably aren't planning on replacing that chip right away. So
Honestly, I feel
spending
like
extra 20.
most of the people that are going to end up buying this aren't the people that are going to look at benchmarks, like specifically the
Yeah.
3100. They're just going to see that it's also a 4-core 8-thread and it's only 0.2 gigahertz base difference, and they'll be like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll just get that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be. But either way, I mean, they both actually are ending up as really good options. So
Yeah.
they both generally beat the similarly priced Intel 9400F. Although the 3100 is very close, it falls a little behind sometimes, but it's pretty much neck and neck. Whereas the 3300X just straight up beats it, and that's a 4-core 4-thread. So there is a little bit of a, okay, well, of course it beats it because it has more threads. But again, when you're looking at price parity, that's the item to compare it to. And the bigger news for a lot of people is the 3300X and the 3100 pretty much across the board beat the 7700K, which was considered an amazing gaming chip and an amazing production chip at the time. Now, of course, things have changed. 8 gigabytes of RAM is no longer the recommendation for a gaming system, and 4 cores is no longer really the recommendation for a gaming system, except laptops. So, if you can, still try and splurge for a 6-core. And get that extra RAM, for example. But
Yeah.
on the ultra budget, it is going to be capable of at least playing most games. You shouldn't run across the games that just don't start on it, because we saw that with some of the dual core parts. So
Yeah, it's just all around great to have much better budget stuff. I'm very glad that they're dropping these.
oh yeah, I mean, the more of that the better, because the budget stuff benefits everybody. And I don't just mean like inherently, I mean directly. So you have the people that can't afford the more expensive equipment, and so they go with the budget stuff. And better budget stuff is just better for people that are either not looking to spend a lot or don't have a lot to spend. But the other thing is, enthusiasts like the budget stuff because it's fun to play with it. Gamers Nexus did extreme overclocking on the 3100 with liquid nitrogen. It's fun to buy cheap hardware that you don't worry about hurting, or you need a small use case for. You want a really small form factor PC that only has a single cooler or something like that, like a really small budget cooler. And so a lot of enthusiasts or people that just have more money to buy things like this are going to buy things anyway, just to toy with or whatever else, or to build their grandparents a system or whatever it may be. And so they end up selling them to most people. I mean, like, sure, I've got a 3970X here as my main desktop rig, but it's like I also do have a 1600, and I'm going to be getting hopefully a 3600 at some point. And there's another one I have and I have a 4670K and a 4790K still in use. Like these smaller core count chips are still fun to use for things. So
Yeah, and then another thing too is that the better that the low end hardware is, the better for especially for gamers overall. And this is something I'm sure
yeah.
we'll talk about more once we get a once we do a wordcast closer to some console announcements.
Uh-huh.
But as the bottom tier moves up, game developers can plan for it and develop around that and take advantage of the hardware better. If they can set a base requirement of a good high quality quad core chip, then that means that they can change game mechanics and they can change um, you know, level design and things like that.
Yeah.
Same thing with, once everyone moves to SSDs, they can change how games are literally made to be played by having better base hardware. And the cheaper and better that base hardware, like that low end hardware is, then the easier it is for them to justify doing that without cutting off a big segment of gamers.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And actually, that you make a good point there. And well, I guess I don't have that much to add to it, but I just agree with you. I just agree with you. um, the more budget stuff we get, the better. As long as it's actually good budget stuff, of course, not
Yeah,
just chop things that are cheap. It just is beneficial across the board for everybody in every segment of the market. So,
yeah.
um,
And then for our final NVIDIA topic, or AMD topic, we can talk about NVIDIA dropping Intel.
so it's also an NVIDIA topic.
Yes, it's all of them.
Oh,
It's literally all of them.
it is literally all of them. Yeah.
The
So
only like major CPU thing not involved is ARM.
you know what? That's true. But then it's not x86, so it doesn't count.
It's still a CPU.
Yeah, just as much as NVIDIA's GPUs are CPUs.
I mean, NVIDIA made CPUs too.
Yeah, I know they did. They made ARM CPUs.
I know.
So yeah, I was actually not at all surprised about this. In fact, I was surprised that the Apple Mac Pro didn't do this. So
I am
NVIDIA,
not at all surprised until USB 4 comes out. Apple will not
yeah.
change because they do not want to drop
No,
Thunderbolt support.
I know, I know, I know. But
I'm
it
just
was still
clarifying
disappointing.
for everyone that's watching. That's the whole reason that they're sticking with Intel. It's
What do you
not because
mean,
it's better.
everyone that's watching? Nobody's watching. Nobody
People
watches
will
us.
be.
Nobody watches us.
Somebody will. Your mom will.
I don't think
No,
she
she
watches
won't.
this podcast.
No, she won't. Your
I'm not
mom will
gonna
not watch this.
talk over her head. Yeah. So anyway, Nvidia dropped Intel for their GGX server units in place of Epic Rome, which isn't surprising at all. Epic Rome is better. Period. AMD is better on the server market. Period. There is not a question on the server market right now. And so it just makes sense for NVIDIA to go this route. They're looking for the best of the best compute, and so they're going to go with whatever makes the most sense for them.
Yeah, it's a
But
good choice.
yeah,
It's just something that's kind of interesting.
it's interesting. And I mean, I think the most important thing for us to take away here is that NVIDIA is making these like dense supercomputers in Jensen's oven.
Yes.
So
Yes, he is. That's actually
yeah,
how they're made, clearly.
that's how they're made. So that's the important thing to take away from here is that you could actually make a $400,000 supercomputer in your oven if you
No,
had
no,
the right
no, no,
parts.
no. Most people don't have the money Jensen does. He has a special oven. You can't just buy his oven.
It didn't look like a special oven to me. I don't know.
No, he took the shell of a normal oven and put NVIDIA oven technology in there that
Oh,
alters
okay.
visuals
So it's
in
like
such
an
a way.
AI deep learning oven.
Yes.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. It's got tensor elements, right? So
Yes, clearly.
that's how it makes this stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
a lot of fun, a lot of fun.